This video is based exclusively on official law enforcement statements, court documents, and verified reporting from major news outlets.
Today is February 23rd. It has been 23 days since Nancy Guthrie was last seen walking into her home at 9:48 p.m. on January 31st. 23 days since the garage door closed. 23 days since her pacemaker signal disconnected. 23 days since blood was found at her front door. In those 23 days, more than 400 investigators have worked the case. Over 40,000 tips have been received. 2 major SWAT operations have been executed. Unknown male DNA has been recovered. Advanced aerial technology has been deployed to detect her pacemaker signal. The FBI has taken the lead on forensic analysis. And yet, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. This is not just a recap. This is a full day 23 update. What we know, what has changed, what has been ruled out, and what still does not make sense.
Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had limited mobility. She had a pacemaker. She relied on daily medication for blood pressure and chronic conditions. She was cognitively sharp. She was independent. She was routine-driven. She did not miss commitments without explanation. On the night of January 31st, she had dinner with family. They played cards. They spent time together. There was nothing unusual reported about her behavior that evening. At 9:48 p.m., she was dropped off at her home. The garage door opened. The garage door closed. That moment, 9:48 p.m., is the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie alive. There are no verified sightings after that. No outgoing calls, no text messages, no phone activity, no confirmed digital footprint. Sometime after midnight, something changed. One of the home cameras disconnected. A masked individual was detected on the property. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her paired phone application. That detail is critical. Pacemakers continuously transmit data. They do not randomly power down. They disconnect when the wearer moves out of Bluetooth range of the connected device or when the paired device is disabled. In practical terms, that means Nancy was no longer near her phone. That is not a coincidence. That is a movement event. Between 9:48 p.m. and approximately 2:28 a.m., there is a window of just under 5 hours. Within that window, the suspect approached the property, interacted with surveillance equipment, caused a bleeding event, and removed Nancy from her home. That is not chaotic timing. That is controlled timing. The next morning, when Nancy failed to appear for her usual virtual church gathering, family members became concerned. They went to her house. Within 7 minutes of arriving, they called 911. 7 minutes is not confusion. 7 minutes is immediate recognition that something was wrong. Authorities arrived and found blood inside and outside the home. Officials publicly confirmed that the blood found outside the residence belonged to Nancy. Sources familiar with the investigation have indicated blood was also present inside the home. But what makes this detail deeply significant is not only whose blood it was, but how it appeared. Bloodstain pattern analysis is one of the most powerful forensic reconstruction tools available. Patterns tell stories. They indicate direction, they indicate velocity, they indicate force, they indicate whether someone was moving, struggling, or stationary. According to investigative sources, the droplets were vertical. 90-degree drops. No drag marks, no swipe marks, no smeared footprints, no visible cast-off patterns, no clear signs of prolonged struggle in the immediate entry area. That matters. Because violent confrontations usually leave violent evidence. They leave overturned furniture, they leave broken objects, they leave smeared blood, they leave impact patterns. Instead, what has been described publicly suggests controlled vertical blood loss. That implies something fast. A sudden injury, possibly inflicted quickly, possibly before Nancy had time to react, possibly before she understood what was happening. The absence of struggle indicators suggests either surprise or rapid incapacitation. Neither scenario suggests randomness. Additionally, the back door was found open. This introduces questions about entry and exit. Did the suspect approach from the front and exit through the rear? Was the open door part of the removal process, or was it staged? Authorities have not publicly detailed forced entry indicators. That silence is significant, because forced entry, or lack thereof, drastically changes motive analysis. Then there are the cameras. Multiple cameras at the residence were reportedly damaged. Destroying cameras is not impulsive behavior. It implies awareness. It implies premeditation. It implies that the suspect either knew cameras were present or identified them quickly and neutralized them. The doorbell footage that was eventually recovered shows a masked male figure. Approximately 5'9" to 5'10", average build, wearing a 3-hole balaclava, black gloves, a black Ozark Trail 25-liter backpack sold exclusively at Walmart, what appears to be a firearm at his waist, a holster described by authorities as having unique characteristics. He approaches the front door. He reaches toward the camera. He appears to manipulate foliage near the lens. Then the footage cuts off. This interaction is psychologically significant. The suspect did not avoid the camera. He confronted it. That suggests he believed he could disable it. And perhaps he believed the footage would not be recoverable. Early public statements suggested there was no usable footage because there was no active cloud subscription. Yet federal forensic specialists were able to retrieve video from back-end servers. If the suspect believed the footage was gone permanently, that belief was incorrect. But the fact that he acted with such confidence suggests planning beyond impulse. Now consider the biological evidence. Unknown male DNA was recovered inside the residence. That DNA does not belong to Nancy. It does not belong to close family members. It did not match any profile in CODIS, the National Criminal DNA Database. CODIS contains millions of offender profiles. A lack of match suggests the contributor may not have a qualifying criminal conviction, may never have been arrested for a qualifying offense, or may never have had DNA legally collected. That shifts investigative strategy significantly. Instead of identifying a known offender, investigators are attempting to identify an unknown individual. That is more complex. Black gloves were also found approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home. DNA was extracted. An unknown male profile was developed. Again, no CODIS match. Authorities have not publicly confirmed whether the DNA from the gloves matches the DNA from inside the home. If they match, the evidentiary link strengthens dramatically. If they do not, the implications are serious. It would suggest more than one male contributor. And on day 22, the sheriff publicly stated investigators are not ruling out more than one suspect. That language is deliberate. It could indicate separate DNA contributors, vehicle movement patterns suggesting coordination, digital evidence indicating communication, or physical evidence pointing to accomplices. At this point, there is no confirmed suspect. No confirmed suspect vehicle publicly described. No confirmed proof of life. No credible ransom verification. But there are consistent signs of preparation. A disguise, gloves, a backpack large enough to carry tools or restraints, a possible firearm, camera neutralization, a narrow overnight operational window. This does not resemble an impulsive act. It resembles structure. It resembles planning. And when planning intersects with the disappearance of an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility and no publicly known enemies, the question becomes unavoidable. Was Nancy the intended target? Or was she part of a plan that went further than expected? That is where the investigation began to escalate. As the days passed, the investigation did not slow down. It intensified. The resources deployed were not typical for a missing person case. They were extraordinary. More than 400 personnel were assigned at peak: local law enforcement, state resources, federal agents, FBI forensic teams. The volume of tips surpassed 40,000. That level of response usually indicates one of two things. Either investigators believe the case has national implications, or they believe it involves a highly dangerous offender. And then came the tactical operations. The first major escalation was a SWAT deployment in Rio Rico. A man was detained. His home was searched extensively. Bomb squad units were present. Media followed the convoy. For hours, the public believed this was the breakthrough. But no arrest followed. The individual was released. Authorities stated they were satisfied with his alibi. That operation became an elimination, not a resolution. Still, it revealed something important. Investigators were acting on digital or geographic leads strong enough to justify a full tactical entry. That is not done casually. Then came a second large-scale operation. This time, much closer to Nancy's neighborhood. Dozens of vehicles, SWAT teams, FBI units, forensic teams, barricades, road closures. 3 individuals were detained. A silver Range Rover was photographed from every angle. The rear hatch was opened, then closed. The vehicle was towed away. License plates were covered before transport. Again, this looked like a turning point. Again, no arrest followed. No public confirmation of a suspect, no recovery of Nancy. But sources described the operation as having meat on the bones. That phrase suggests useful evidence was obtained. What kind of evidence? Digital devices, location data, trace evidence, vehicle forensics? Authorities have not disclosed. And that silence has fueled speculation. At the same time, forensic complexity increased. The unknown male DNA recovered from inside the home was described as mixed DNA. Mixed DNA samples are notoriously difficult to separate. They contain genetic material from multiple contributors. Separating profiles requires advanced laboratory processing. It takes time. And the timeline matters. The glove DNA was processed separately. That profile did not match anyone in CODIS. But investigators acknowledged they were exploring genetic genealogy options. Genetic genealogy does not require a CODIS match. Instead, it compares unknown DNA against consumer genealogy databases where users have opted in. It searches for distant relatives, even partial matches, as low as third or fourth cousins can be used to build family trees. From there, investigators narrow down candidates by age, location, and other factors. This method identified the Golden State Killer decades after his crimes. It identified suspects in high-profile university homicide cases. It works. But it requires a viable DNA profile. And it requires time. Time to build trees, time to cross-reference public records, time to eliminate branches. As of day 22, there has been no public confirmation of a genealogical match. But officials have acknowledged that this pathway is active. That means somewhere, analysts may be constructing family trees tied to that unknown male DNA. At the same time, technology was deployed that few people have heard of. Aerial Bluetooth detection systems. Specialized equipment capable of detecting unique signal identifiers from devices, including pacemakers, from hundreds of feet away. Nancy's pacemaker has a unique identifier. It continuously transmits. Helicopters were reportedly equipped with scanning systems designed to detect that signal. If the pacemaker were within range, it could potentially be located. There has been no public statement confirming detection. That absence speaks loudly. Because if it had been detected, that would have triggered immediate response. Another investigative avenue involved the backpack seen in the footage. The Ozark Trail 25-liter model is sold exclusively at Walmart. That creates a finite distribution channel. Investigators reportedly reviewed purchase records and in-store surveillance tied to recent sales. If a suspect purchased that backpack shortly before January 31st, there may be transaction data. But backpacks are common items. Cash purchases are difficult to trace. Still, the fact that the model was identified shows attention to detail. The same applies to the holster. Authorities described it as having unique characteristics. FBI agents reportedly visited gun stores, showing images and asking employees if they recognized the holster or individuals connected to specific purchases. This is strategic narrowing. Holsters are less common than backpacks. Unique features reduce the suspect pool. But again, no public match has been announced. Meanwhile, conflicting narratives began to surface. Reports emerged suggesting friction between local law enforcement and federal authorities. Some sources claimed the FBI had taken the lead on forensic operations. Others suggested internal communication challenges. The sheriff publicly denied friction. The FBI publicly emphasized cooperation. But inconsistencies in messaging were noticeable. At one point, statements regarding camera footage availability appeared contradictory. At another, comments about lab processing timelines seemed misaligned between agencies. When multiple agencies collaborate at this scale, coordination is critical. Even minor communication gaps can create confusion, both internally and publicly. And public perception matters. Because public trust fuels tips. Tips fuel investigations. There was also discussion about ransom communications. Multiple ransom-style messages were received. Demands for cryptocurrency, promises of information, no proof of life. Authorities have indicated these communications are not considered credible. In legitimate ransom cases, proof of life is standard. Without it, law enforcement treats such messages as opportunistic exploitation. Still, each message must be investigated. Each message consumes time and resources. By the third week, another shift occurred in public messaging. Investigators stated they were not ruling out the possibility of multiple suspects. That statement expands the operational theory. A single offender scenario involves one timeline. A multi-offender scenario introduces coordination. It introduces communication, planning sessions, division of roles. Driver, primary contact, lookout, equipment handler. The scale of planning suggested by the footage, the backpack, the gloves, and the removal of Nancy aligns more comfortably with at least logistical support. But there is no confirmation. Only possibilities. And as the case moves deeper into week 4, one thing becomes increasingly clear. This was not simple. This was not random chaos. This was structured. And despite the scale of the response, despite the technology, despite the manpower, Nancy Guthrie remains missing. Which brings us to the final and most uncomfortable layer of this case. What still does not add up? After 23 days, the facts we have are clear. But clarity does not equal resolution. Because when you step back and look at everything together, several elements remain deeply unsettling. First, the blood. If the blood pattern indicates a rapid injury, if there was no prolonged struggle, if Nancy was incapacitated quickly, then the operation required speed and control. An 84-year-old woman with limited mobility does not vanish silently unless someone ensures she cannot resist. That suggests physical dominance, preparation, possibly restraint. And if restraint was used, that implies materials were brought to the scene. Zip ties, tape, cuffs, something planned in advance. That brings us back to the backpack. A 25-liter pack is large enough to carry tools. It is not random luggage. It is functional. And the suspect wore it before entering the home. That means whatever was inside was intended for use. Now consider the removal itself. Nancy could not walk more than short distances without assistance. She could not be forced into a vehicle quickly without either being carried or heavily supported. Carrying an adult, even one with limited mobility, is physically demanding. That implies strength or assistance. If this was a single offender, he was confident in his ability to overpower, control, and transport her without detection. If this was multiple offenders, the logistics become easier. But either scenario requires vehicle access. And yet, 23 days later, there has been no confirmed public description of a suspect vehicle. That absence is striking. In many abduction cases, vehicles are the breakthrough element. License plates, security cameras, traffic cameras, toll readers, gas station footage. But here No clear vehicle was captured, or investigators are withholding that information strategically. Both possibilities are concerning. Then there is the timing. Between 9:48 p.m. and 2:28 a.m., the event unfolds. That window suggests the suspect was not rushed. He did not need to flee immediately. He operated during a time when neighborhood activity would be minimal. That suggests knowledge of the environment. Was this someone local? Someone who had surveilled the home previously? Someone who knew Nancy's routines? There has been no public confirmation of prior stalking. But planning often leaves digital traces. Search histories, mapping activity, geofence warrants, cell tower dumps. Authorities have not publicly disclosed whether such digital sweeps were conducted. But in a case of this magnitude, it is almost certain they were. Which leads to a deeper concern. If all of those digital avenues have been explored and no clear suspect has emerged, what does that suggest? Either the perpetrator was extremely careful, or extremely experienced, or extremely lucky. Now consider the DNA. Unknown male DNA inside the home. Unknown male DNA from gloves found miles away. No CODIS match. Mixed DNA that requires separation. If a viable single-source profile is extracted, genetic genealogy could identify relatives. But what if the DNA quality is degraded? What if the sample is partial? What if it cannot produce a reliable SNP profile for genealogical upload? That possibility cannot be ignored. Genetic genealogy is powerful, but only if the underlying profile is strong. If the sample is too compromised, the pathway narrows. And then the investigation relies more heavily on traditional detective work. Interviews, timeline reconstruction, financial records, behavioral analysis. Which brings us to another uncomfortable layer. Public messaging. In high-profile investigations, messaging evolves as information evolves. Yet in this case, messaging has sometimes appeared inconsistent. Early statements about no available footage, later recovery of footage. Public reassurances about community safety, simultaneous acknowledgement of an unidentified armed suspect. Statements about lab progress, then clarifications about DNA separation delays. None of this necessarily indicates failure, but it does indicate complexity. And complexity often hides critical friction points. Another element that does not add up is motive. There has been speculation. Burglary gone wrong, targeted attack, ransom attempt, random intrusion, connection to a high-profile family member. Yet none of those theories have been publicly confirmed. A burglary gone wrong usually leaves stolen items. A ransom kidnapping usually produces proof of life. A targeted revenge attack usually leaves threats or communications. A random intrusion usually does not involve this level of preparation. And yet here we are. No proof of life, no confirmed ransom legitimacy, no confirmed stolen property, no identified suspect. Only removal. Nancy was removed. And removal suggests objective. If harm was the sole objective, why remove her entirely? If silence was the objective, why leave recoverable evidence? If ransom was the objective, why provide no proof of life? Every scenario leaves gaps, Now consider the psychological dimension. The suspect approached a home at night, masked, gloved, armed. That requires emotional detachment. That requires willingness to confront risk. This was not a spontaneous act fueled by sudden rage. The calm approach visible in the footage suggests someone operating with intention. And intention usually has a trigger. Financial desperation, personal grievance, delusion, opportunity linked to vulnerability. Investigators have likely built behavioral profiles. They have likely analyzed gait in the footage, movement patterns, hand dominance, body posture. But none of that has been shared publicly, which leaves the public with fragments. And fragments create tension. Because after 23 days, with helicopters, SWAT teams, DNA labs, federal agents, and thousands of tips, Nancy Guthrie is still missing. The scale of the response tells us something important. Authorities believe this case is solvable. They would not continue this level of investment if they believed there was no pathway forward. Which means somewhere in the evidence, in the DNA, in the digital data, in the vehicle traces, in the behavioral indicators, there is something they believe will lead somewhere. But until it does, the questions remain. Who approached that door? Who carried that backpack? Who left that DNA? And where is Nancy?
This is day 23. 23 days since an 84-year-old woman walked into her home and never walked out again. 23 days of silence. 23 days of unanswered calls. 23 days of a family waking up without answers. There is blood. There is video. There is DNA. There is planning. There is effort. There is manpower. There is technology. What there is not is resolution. And here is the truth. Someone knows something. Someone saw something. Someone has noticed a change in behavior. Someone has seen a vehicle that no longer appears. Someone has heard a story that does not quite make sense. Cases like this are not solved by luck. They are solved by fracture points. A small inconsistency. A loose thread. A single tip that connects two fragments. If the person responsible believed the mask would protect him, technology says otherwise. If the person responsible believed no one would trace the DNA, science says otherwise. If the person responsible believed time would bury this, history says otherwise. Because planning leaves patterns. And patterns can be traced. Day 23 is not the end of this story. It is the point where pressure increases. It is the point where patience thins. It is the point where someone involved begins to make mistakes. Nancy Guthrie deserves to be found. Her family deserves answers. And whoever is responsible is not invisible. Not to the evidence. Not to the science. Not to time. This is day 23. And the clock is still running.